So these are 3 puzzles that you probably won't be seeing me play with much, if not at all. But I decided to 3D print anyway because I do have some ideas that I want to push out. I don't think any of these puzzles deserves a separate video on its own, maybe apart from example solve on the mirror blocks. Yeah, so I decided to just lump them all in one big video. I'm going to start with the mirror blocks. So this one is the only one of the 3 that is not completely 3D printed. It's actually built off what used to be my 2016 main, the Florian modded Yongjin Guansu. And then the 3D printed part of it is just the extensions. So there is one face that is not extended, and opposite that is a 10mm side, 2mm and an 8mm side, and then a 4mm and 6mm side. The extensions are only 2mm difference from each other because I don't want the cube to become too big. There's no cutting down involved, so the only way to make the faces different from each other is to extend, and if I extend them by more than 2mm worth of difference on every side, that would create quite a huge puzzle. And I also feel that like I have quite a bunch of old cubes that are still really good and really nice to turn and possible, but obviously the cube is not good enough to perform at like top level speed cube. I think the best compromise is just to give them a relatively safe mod like mirror blocks or cuboids. The cuboids require you to bandage some layers together, which is not something I wanted to do with the Guansu. I wanted to enjoy the whole cube because the turning quality is too good. And I will say that after doing the mod, the turning quality went down a little bit, but not by much. I mean, it's inevitable because some of the extensions are harder material and they do compromise the reverse corner cutting a bit, but I would say that still most of the turning quality of this puzzle is there. The next puzzle would just be the Square-1. So this Square-1 actually came from an idea where I noticed that most Square-1s could only stretch in one direction, which is the horizontal axis. You know, they have one nut here and one screw that goes into the nut from this direction, and then there's a spring in the middle. So yeah, the whole Square-1 only has one spring. So I wanted to do more and make the Square-1 stretch in vertical directions as well, not just the horizontal. So this Square-1 has 5 springs in total because due to the nature of how a Square-1 mechanism is, like the 2 halves are kind of separate from each other, so I needed 2 screws on top and 2 screws below. That's 4 extra screws. So nope, the corner cutting isn't that different from a regular Square-1, and also its auto alignment is pretty strong. But I think for corner cutting, what you can do is this direction. I do think this is the difference made by the vertical elasticity. And then I put the magnet right into the foot of the piece. So this makes it very near the center of rotation, so you can attract from a bigger angle. I did concave the middle slice on 2 sides. These 2 sides are flat. This one I think is mostly aesthetics, but the one that I think could potentially be useful are the concave edges. And that's mainly because another idea I had is, in the actual Square-1 solve, it's possible to shapeshift it to a condition where multiple of these edges line up, and the angle at which the edges meet on the outside is quite a large angle. So if you wanted to finger trick a puzzle that has been shapeshifted to have many edges together, I do think it might be beneficial to actually concave all the edges. And these are mostly the ideas that I kind of put forth in this Square-1. Lastly, this 2x2. It is also another bunch of ideas. Unfortunately, I didn't 100% go ahead with what I wanted to do with this 2x2 because the turning is just terrible. And I feel that I don't want to waste my magnets gluing them into this 2x2. But unfortunately, the ideas I want to put forth, almost all of them are related to magnets. The main theme of this 2x2 is just to make a mockery of customization. So this 2x2 is supposed to be one that has infinity magnet settings that you can change with just one single screw. So how this works is, most 2x2s have an anchor piece underneath, and obviously this cap is due to 3D printer accuracy issues, I decided to just do a cap that fits in kind of like the Ultron GTS cap, where it's not a friction held piece. It's one that is kind of has some torpedo-like structures to hook underneath other pieces. Other than that, underneath this cap is the rest of the anchor piece. So what an anchor piece is in 2x2 is, since 2x2 is pretty much a 3x3 with a hidden middle layer, Like there's one piece that contains a bunch of pieces glued together so that the middle will never come out of alignment. So what happens is I still didn't touch the normal 3x3 centers in this 2x2, but I made one piece that is one corner and 3 edges fused together, and then that will be the black part behind. And then on top of that, there's this white part on top. This is like a 3-armed spider that has each arm will stick all its way as far as the tip of the edge where it interacts with the other corner. This will apply on all 3 axes. So any movement of this 3-armed spider would mean that the magnets, these 3 magnets would be in a slightly different position, and these 3 magnets touch every other magnet in the cube, like for every single scramble. So in other words, turning this one screw pretty much takes care of the whole cube's magnetism. How it works is basically one screw and one spring. But the difference between the centerpiece where the spring pushes the piece down, here the spring actually pushes this piece up. So if I tighten the screw, then the limit to how high this piece would actually be lower, and this will make these 3 magnets closer and strengthen the whole cube's magnet strength. Because with this thing lower down, the magnet is actually closer to the neighboring piece. Now of course, if you loosen the screw, then the spring would push this thing as high as the screw is, so the piece will go higher and the magnet will become further and it's just weaker. Since this is a spring and a screw and not a definitive set of clicks, you can pretty much turn to any setting you like. Another thing I wanted to do with this 2x2 is to actually build 3 faces maglev and 3 faces springs, but I have undone this mod simply because I do think it's not worth wasting all those ring magnets inside a cube of this kind of turning quality. But the whole point behind that is, obviously this is not as convenient as turning one single screw to change the whole magnet settings, but with 3 faces maglev and 3 faces springs in an actual mass-produced cube, let's say if this cube made a mass-produced quality model, and like people can actually switch between maglev and springs simply by disassembling the puzzle and assembling it in the opposite way, because these 3 faces with springs they're surrounding the anchor piece. They actually don't really play a part in the turning faces. So the whole cube will play like a maglev cube, and if we were to disassemble it and assemble it on the opposite side where the anchor piece are between the 3 maglev faces, then the 3 spring faces will be the free ones that can turn and like this allow this cube to play like a spring cube. So that actually adds another layer of customizability, but obviously it's not implemented, or it was implemented but just not used, and then I undid the mod because I would say with this 2x2 and this Square-1, it's mostly a proof of concept, as well as like probably my maglev 4x4s as well. They're mostly proof of concept that certain things can be done. Whereas this one, I would say this one is probably the most satisfactory one because it's built on a puzzle that already works. But the whole purpose of this is just to give a second life to what would have been an no longer used puzzle. So I do think this one achieves its purpose. Whereas these two, obviously it would have been ideal if a 3D printer print something as good as a mass-produced cube. But for now, at most, the best I can do is just show that the idea works. But